In terms of integration, well, I'd rather use how can you complement or supplement, because it's like one measure, I mean gross domestic product, it actually measures, it's a very good measure of economic activity in a country, but it fails to measure anything which is non-economic, like I don't know, culture or or social capital, for instance, whereas gross national happiness does that. So I would rather say it's they would complement each other in a very good way, because as I mentioned, GDP looks at the economic front, and gross national happiness, on the other hand, will look at the non-economic front. So if you have two measures together, then it actually creates a robust measure of progress. It's a holistic measure of progress, because then you would have, indicators for how well you're doing economically, as well as how well you're doing in terms of culture, or your social capital, or social connectedness, and so on. Well, it all depends on the government, which kind of path they want to take. For Bhutan, now what I can do or say here is share with you the Bhutanese experiment. And Bhutan, we have actually adopted gross national happiness indicators, whereby we have this holistic approach towards development by classifying the concept into those 9 dimensions of psychological well-being, health, education, living standard, time use, culture, community, good governance, and so on. So in terms of how you want to measure happiness, for Bhutan, happiness is not just the state of mind. It's not just asking and going to a person, how happy are you today? How happy you are yesterday, you were yesterday, or happy, do you find yourself down in 5 years? So that is not the only question that we use to measure happiness of the people. We actually use this holistic approach of looking at all those 9 dimensions. How is the condition of your mental health? How is the condition of physical health? What kind of a community are you living in? Is it safe? What kind of social connectedness you have in your family, within your community? So there are so many. It is a holistic range of measures that we actually incorporate to measure happiness. But of course, there are some other countries who only depend on the single indicator of just asking a person how happy you are. But from a Bhutanese perspective, would say that a very holistic measure is followed or adopted. Now, why do we require indicators? It makes you reflect that question. We require these kind of measures because what we value is different. For instance, as a person, as an individual, or as a nation, if you value economic aspect, then your reference point is just going to be GDP or GNI, for that matter. But because as a nation we value culture, we value spirituality, we value community, relationships, family relationships, we value all of those non-economic aspects. So that is why we actually go down that path of trying to measure the non-economic. In terms of creation of happiness, there are several ways, as I mentioned earlier. Firstly is through policy focus. So by having these kind of indicators, we can actually have a policy and a planning focus on what kind of indicators are going well in the country. How's your culture, how's your community, how's the spirituality level amongst people, how's the sense of belonging of the members of the community. So when you actually track these indicators every 2 or 3 years or every 5 years, then the country has a sense of where we are and which direction we are moving. So it actually, it's very beneficial in terms of policy recommendations. Then you're able to say, as a policy decision maker, okay, this is where we are going wrong. There's a crime rate is increasing, maybe suicide rates are increasing because there's a social disconnection, there's social isolation. So all these indicators actually help us to indicate where we are going wrong, in which aspects, and then we can actually go out meet with the politicians, and then the policymakers, they will discuss and then formulate programs, initiatives and activities that actually improve situations in the community. That is one way of improving, the quality and happiness of the people. Another way is, of course, to internalize whatever values are being mentioned from a GNH perspective, from a happiness or a well-being perspective. So every time, the choices that you make, the decisions that you make in your life, ultimately has to boil down on what values you're inculcating in your daily lives. So that is very important. Firstly, of course, you need the policies, all the right conditions in place, but secondly, the will and the motivation of the citizens, the awareness and the mindfulness of trying to incorporate those values is equally important. I think these two things will then, at the end of the day, create happiness or improve the quality of the citizens.